So hello, and in today's video it's a little bit of a different one. I usually do the top 10s around creatures or whatnot, and I thought today, what do the beginners need? And I think they need some top tips. So I'm going to give you 5 tips if you're a struggling arc player, which I think you should follow, and you'll get up to the top in no time. Tip number 5 is housing, and getting a base and sort of settling an area in the early game, in my opinion, is going to be really important for you. Building a thatch hut isn't too much to ask for, and you can keep the stuff there, get a bed down. That means if you do die, there's a lot that you can do to recoup yourself, because inevitably that is going to happen. But if you can negate what you lose when you die, it really can help to have a base, have some equipment and just some general stuff there. Plan it out, and most certainly a lot of beds for those respawn points, because there's nothing worse than dying, realizing you don't have a bed and just spawning in the middle of nowhere and then dying on your way back to base, or just not even having a base in the early game. It can really drive you in the wrong direction. So I strongly recommend, even if it is a couple of thatch foundations and maybe a few walls, or just a thatch foundation and a bed and a storage box, get something down so you can start using that, and it is really going to help you progress further. Of course, you can expand it over time. In number 4, we've got explorer notes, and this is one which I really want to put here, because if you're particularly struggling with leveling up, look up where the explorer notes are, or maybe go for a wander yourself. Although if you're new to the game, I'd recommend looking it up, but some of them are relatively easy to find. They're usually around notable things, and you can tell where they are because they've got these sort of structures around them. Once you know sort of where to look for them and just generally to look out for them, your leveling will progress a lot, because you get tons of XP from this. You can also use this to level up your creatures as well, which is beneficial if you're preparing for boss fights, although by that time you might have now doors them up, but there might be a few which you haven't. You can always check your achievements to check if you've got them. I know that might only be, if you got 100% of them in the past, it might show up as you still got all of them, but it's a useful way to know if you've got all the explorer notes yet. And you can always look on the map and go around, see which ones you haven't got and see which ones you have got, and you can always move to different maps as well to get even more. But particularly if you're starting out, find some explorer note locations, pick a spawn point where there are loads nearby, and go for it and see how many explorer notes you can get, because it's going to boost your level. Even if you die in between runs, I would recommend doing this before you start building a base. Then you can get your levels up, get your stats up a bit, and then you've got loads of tools at your arsenal to make once you do find somewhere to settle. Number 3 is getting your weapon game together. Things like spears are incredibly useful in the early game. Pikes and swords and obviously guns of any sort are off the table for beginners, but even the simple spear or maybe slingshot for knocking stuff out, but the spear is really where it's at. The club can sort of be useful at times as well, but I'm mainly focusing on spears here. Get yourself some spears, and of course the bow as well. It's going to give you some long range combat, and it will help you out with creatures, and it ties in quite nicely to the thing which is next up. But if you're screaming at the screen knowing what I'm going to say, keep that and see if what you're thinking I'm going to say is actually what I say. But for the time being, spears and bows, get yourself some of those. Get yourself as many arrows as you can, 100 at all times. Really, they're not too expensive to make. If you're playing on default rates, that might be a little bit of trouble for you, and a little bit less. But as many arrows as you can, get yourself a bow and get yourself some spears, and quite a lot of them, because they will break. But keep some in your base as well, because they are reasonably heavy. Same for the arrows, you should always have some spares back. If you do die, you can get yourself some weaponry. Some armor is also useful as a little side note, as that is not on my list, but it gets a little mention here. Get yourself armor as soon as possible. Pretty self-explanatory, but it goes well with the weapons. In number 2, we have got bowlers, and this is just something which I think it deserves its own. Now, I was considering putting parachutes on here, but I think bowlers are far more useful to you beginners out there, because if you've got raptors chasing after you, or maybe in a PvP situation, if you're somehow finding yourself in that scenario, you could bowler a player as well. But I'm mainly thinking for raptors and smaller pests that you're going to find around. It can get you out of a lot of trouble, and if you want to be taming your first pteranodon and getting up in the air, a bowler and a club is probably what you're going to be using. So the bowler is incredibly useful, and it still is right the way through the game. But if you have not got yourself a bowler yet and you are a beginner, please get them now. And if you're not a high enough level yet, do the Explorer Note tip like I said earlier, because that is going to get you the necessary XP required to allow you to get those bowlers. I really think they're useful, and I think you should get one immediately because it is hindering your playing and not having them. So sorry to interrupt the video, but I simply must talk about my Patreon membership just for a second, as this channel is moving towards bigger videos now, and you can really help out with all the stuff. You'll get the videos a week early as well on the higher tiers, and on the lower tiers you get them 24 hours earlier, and you can even get exclusive videos that will never be on YouTube. The 2 higher tiers as well have 7 days of free trial, so there really is nothing to miss out on, and if you don't like it, then you can simply just leave. That 7 days is for you to experience the Patreon and see if it really is for you. But truly, I think it will be. You will absolutely love the Patreon. There is going to be so much content that is going to go out on there, and I really do thank you for any support you could possibly give. Even if you join as a free member, you are still contributing to the channel, and I really do appreciate it. There's a Discord server as well for the higher tiers too, so if you feel like chatting with me on maybe a bit more of a personal level, then that Discord server is there, and I hope to see you all on it soon. Let's get back to the video though. And finally, it's pretty self-explanatory for a dinosaur game, but tame stuff. Just tame as many things as you can. Now, obviously taming the dodos, the lystros, the dilos, whatever, can be nice, but if you're looking up to some bigger creatures like maybe a raptor or a trike or a carbenemes or a stego or anything like that, tame stuff, or just tame those things. But even taming stuff is useful in just learning and progressing on how all the tames work, because you've got knockout tames, passive tames, and special tames on top of that as well. But you should mainly be focusing on the passive and knockout tames. Get yourself used to it. Bowlers are going to come in handy if you do want to tame yourself raptors or pteranodons. Get useful to how the knockout method works. Either use a club, a slingshot, or some trank arrows on a bow. Depending on where you are, you probably won't be in the trank dart range yet, but if you do manage to find yourself across those, then of course don't use those for your taming. But in my opinion, just taming stuff is probably the best thing you can do. It may be a struggle, but just get out there, try and tame some things, and you know, try and tame some bigger things. You might think they're a little bit out of your field, but you know, you can always make some traps. At some point I will be doing a trap guide, and if you're interested in that, comment down below, because there will be one coming soon, but it will come even sooner if you comment it down below, maybe within the next couple of days. But anyway, that is all I have time for today. I hope that if you're a beginner, this has given you some insight and hopefully helps you along the way in your Ark playing. And to everyone else, you know, just a refresh of, you know, these are the 5 things that you should keep doing in Ark every time you're starting afresh, or just even while you're playing as well, because it will keep you up to scratch. So ASA, it's a game we all know, and in my opinion, it's probably not my preference compared to the base game, but I know a lot of you out there like it. Sadly, this isn't the video for you though, as I'm just going to go with 5 problems I have with ASA. In no particular order. The one at number 1 isn't necessarily more important than the one at number 5. Just 5 talking points about what I think ASA possibly could have done better. So let's get into the first one, which is a little nag from me. And I don't know if you console players know as much about anti-aliasing as us PC players out there, but there are so many different types, from TAA to SMAA, and just the list goes on. I'm not even going to bother to read all of them out. Essentially, the anti-aliasing used on ASA is really not nice in my opinion. It's some form of TAA, and it just adds a sort of muddiness to the image. With frame generation and things like that and DLSS on, it doesn't help anymore, but still I think even with none of that on, the game's visual clarity isn't as it should be, at least on PC. I haven't had any console experience, so I can't say for you console players. In the trailers, it looks all really nice, but when you're playing the game, there's a lack of clarity around those edges, and it sort of looks a bit smudgy and a bit muddy. For reference, I am playing at 1440p and not playing at a low resolution. I've got an RTX 3090 in my hands, and I do play with frame generation and DLSS. But even when I turn them off, the issue is still there and still persisting. So, you know, I don't really know the reason behind it, but I do think if Wildcard integrated some better anti-aliasing, it may be better for the game. Next up, we have got ourselves the Pyromane, and I have big issues with this. Now, some people love the Pyromane, and for them, great, and I admit it is a great creature, or at least it looks to be a great creature. I refuse to use it, and I'm never going to use one because I'm completely against the fact that it is a paid creature. I already wasn't a fan of the Oasaur being locked behind Bob's Tall Tales, but at least you still got Bob's Tall Tales with it, so it was less of an issue in my opinion. But the Pyromane is just a creature just on its own, and that is all it is, and I'm just so sick of it, and it feels so sick to me that this actually happened, and it's probably the most controversial thing from my point of view that's happened in ASA's journey so far, to some extent, because it really has divided. I don't think there should be a creature that's just locked behind a paywall. It should all be behind skill, and not who has money in their pocket or who actually wants to shell out more money for a better creature, because after all, you're paying for the base game anyway. And Snail Games, although, you know, it's going under at this point, still wants as much money as possible from you, and it really doesn't sit right with me, and I don't think that the Pyromane was a good move at all for ASA, and it was one of the main reasons actually why I stopped playing, sort of out of protest on ASA, because it's just like, no, the Pyromane is just one step too far. I am not going to deal with that. Now, a lot of you may like it, and you are happy to agree or disagree with these issues that I am posing, because they may not be issues for you, they're just issues for me. As always, feel free just for a little bit of a debate and discussion, but do keep it generally concise and generally neutral. Express your opinion, but don't be mean or anything like that, because we don't want any of that in the comment section. We are a community after all, and we should all be respectful of each other's opinions. So continuing on, we have got map details. This is more prevalent on Scorched Earth, as a lot of the just general ruins on Scorched Earth have had a lot of lost detail, especially near that cave where you have to go into the church. If you compare them between ASA and ASE, there is a massive amount of detail lost, and although the maps do look detailed from the face of it, there is a lot that has been rushed and just skipped around, and it is a little bit of a shame in my opinion, but you know, that's just the way it is, I guess. But you know, considering all of this, I do think a little bit of time could have been spent on these maps, a little bit more time I should say, because time definitely has been spent and effort definitely has been put in, but I do think there's a very evident amount of rushing in this game. Still, with all the new maps coming out, Av does have a little bit of that as well, and Scorched Earth is just the one which I think is most notable, so that's why I put that here. Now, quite the controversial one is all the issues with the Trado and you not being able to run your own servers, and then you having to use their servers. This was a big issue for server runners, and although I'm not a server runner myself, this really did hit hard for me, as I was like, really, is this what we're stooping down to? It just seemed like an all new low that hadn't been reached before, and it was like, how is this even just happening? And although the situation is getting there and is largely resolved to some extent, the damage has still been dealt, and the trust in a lot of players has been lost, and it even got players like Neddy the Noodle, for some reason I couldn't say that, But Neddy the Noodle was, you know, going to leave the game unless they did this, and he sort of has to some extent. There have been a lot of issues in the ARK community to do with this Nitrado issue. It was the same with Snail Games, like banning people on PvP servers or whatnot in ASA as well. That was completely unacceptable. There's just been some not very nice things coming from Nitrado, and then also they got rid of their whole Spanish audience as well. So I don't know if it's to do with money issues, but most likely it is. I still think it is unacceptable though. And finally, my last point is the characters and UI, and I don't know what it is for me, but I really don't like the ARK characters in ARK Survival Ascended. Again, it's a little nag to end on, but the characters just look a little bit goofy and cartoonish for me compared to the characters that you'd see in Survival Evolved. I think they would have transferred over a lot better. Again, leave your thoughts on this, because after all, these are my opinions and not yours. Also, I think the UI in ASE is just better. I think there's just more clarity based on the specimen implant. Not really quite a fan of it as much in ASA. There isn't too much difference. It is definitely little nags after little nags. But yeah, that is my last point, and that does wrap up my little ranty rant of the 5 things that I think ASA could have done better, and you know, maybe I would have still been playing the game if it kept this, but I probably will go back to it within the coming months or years even. But that is all I have to say for today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Again, leave your opinions, because I want to know what your thoughts are, but do keep it respectful, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye. And give it up for our patrons, Ekaterina Puchkova and Karina Thorne, Dominic Maciejewski, sorry about that name, and everyone else that's on this list. All the people I've mentioned are paid members, and if you feel like that's something you want a shout out at the end of the video, go join the Patreon or become a paid YouTube member.